Welcome back. This time moving on to strength and power development. So we're going to talk about strength training, which is an area of interest for me. Most of this stuff is going to be new material, although some of it will overlap with things that we've talked about previously. And then also there will be some overlap with some concepts that we talked about back in 201. So as you're probably aware, the biomotor ability that is strength has some pretty significant overlap with other biomotor abilities. So for example, has some pretty significant overlap with muscular power and also muscular endurance. So as you can see there on the slide, muscular strength influences running speed. So the way that works is that the stronger you are in hip extension, knee extension, and plantar flexion, the harder you can push off against the ground, and so the harder the ground pushes back against you to make a connection to biomechanics. That's ground reaction forces. But the harder you can push against the ground, the longer your stride can be. And by increasing stride length, then we can increase running speed, because the two factors of running speed are stride length and stride frequency. So how far you push with each step and then how many steps you take. And if we can increase muscular strength, we can increase stride length, which then allows the athlete to run faster. So muscular strength then influences running speed. Muscular strength also influences muscular endurance. And the classic example here is if we consider something like a push-up. So at the very bottom of a push-up, if you're doing a full push-up where your toes are on the ground and you're in normal push-up position, when you're at the very bottom of it without laying on the ground, you're supporting about 75% of your body weight. And so if we take a hypothetical 150-pound person who also hypothetically bench presses 150 pounds, so they can bench press their body weight but no more, and we have them do a push-up, so with each repetition they are doing 75% of their 1 rep max on bench press, right? And so, and the actual weight there is they're doing 112.5 pounds at the bottom of that push-up for our 150-pound person. But again, they're doing 75% of their 1 rep max on bench press, and so we would expect that somebody who is doing 75% of their 1 rep max would be able to get somewhere in the neighborhood of 12 repetitions before they would fatigue. So this hypothetical person then, who can bench press their body weight, can probably do 12 good push-ups before they're going to fatigue and their form is going to break down and all of that. Well, if we take that same person, we do a bunch of bench press training with them, and we get their bench press max up from 150 to 200 pounds, but we keep their body weight the same. By doing that, when they're doing a push-up, because again, they're still going to be pressing 112.5 pounds at the bottom of that push-up because they still weigh the same. So 75% of 150 is still 112.5. So they're still pressing the same amount at the bottom of that push-up, but because their bench press is higher, because it's 200 pounds instead of 150 pounds, now on each repetition, they're only pressing 56% of their 1 rep max because they're stronger. And so if we have somebody who's pressing 56% of their 1 rep max, they're probably going to be able to do closer to 50 push-ups before they fatigue. So we've increased muscular endurance not by working on muscular endurance, but instead by increasing muscular strength. So using that example, if you want somebody to be able to do more push-ups, let's say for like a military recruit who maybe has to do a certain amount of push-ups to pass a physical fitness test, one of the things that you can do is have them do lots of repetitions. You can have them just do burnouts, on bench press or dumbbell presses or push-ups or whatever. So you can do a bunch of high rep stuff with them, and that'll increase muscular endurance. Or you can just have them lift heavy. And so by lifting heavy, you're going to see a greater increase in their 1 repetition max. And by increasing the 1 repetition max, you'll also thereby increase muscular endurance. So those two are very much interrelated. And because of that, so if we add strength training to programs for endurance athletes, it's going to increase their muscular endurance and should increase their performance. And as you can see there, by focusing on strength, we can actually improve the performance of endurance athletes more than when we focus just on endurance alone. So as I was telling somebody in grading one of the projects, one of the programming projects, is that there's kind of 2 schools of thought on training endurance athletes. Sometimes, with respect to the weight room anyway, you'll see where the athletes do really high repetition type stuff, so maybe sets of 15, 20, 25 repetitions with really short rest periods, like less than a minute between sets, and circuit training kind of stuff. And that'll work, that'll increase muscular endurance. And then there's kind of another school of thought of like, well, we'll just have them lift really heavy weights and we'll increase their 1 rep max so that they have to recruit fewer motor units with each step, assuming they're a running endurance athlete. They'll have to recruit fewer motor units with each step, and so by doing that, we can increase their overall muscular endurance and thereby increase their performance. So kind of the two ways that you can go then is to have them do specific muscular endurance training, high rep, short rest intervals, or you can have them do really heavy training, which a lot of your cross country or your endurance athletes are probably not going to be big fans of, but it is effective at increasing muscular endurance. So you have them do, 80-85% of their 1 rep max for 5 repetitions or less for 3 to 6 sets, heavy stuff like that with longer rest periods, so like 2 to 5 minute rest periods, and that'll actually increase their muscular endurance potentially more effectively. So we should probably define strength. So you can see there, strength can be defined as maximal force or torque that a muscle or group can generate. So torque is a turning force. So for most of the joints that we concern ourselves with, the way they work is that one bone rotates around another. So if you think about something like the knee, that's a hinge joint. So your tibia, your shin bone, is going to rotate around your femur, which is your thigh bone, right? So whenever your quads, the muscles on the front of the thigh, contract, they're going to rotate the tibia around the femur. And so that rotational force, that turning force that the quads generate, then that's torque. And so by increasing the strength of the quadricep muscle group, we increase the torque or the turning force, which is then maximal strength. So there's another way of defining maximal strength, which you can see is also included. So it's the ability of the neuromuscular system to produce force against an external resistance. So a number of factors affect the expression of muscular strength. So the first one is motor unit recruitment, and this is one of those things that we talked about back in 201. So hopefully you'll remember that a motor unit is a single alpha motor neuron and all of the muscle fibers that it innervates. So what you're looking at here, so obviously this is a cross section of the spinal cord. So you got the white matter out here and the gray matter in the middle. And then in these ventral or anterior horns here, you've got the alpha motor neurons. And so this is one little alpha motor neuron, that's its cell body there. And then this purple thing here is its axon that runs all the way out to, in this case, 2 muscle fibers. So that's one motor unit, this little neuron, and the 2 muscle fibers that it innervates. And then our second motor unit is this little red alpha motor neuron and the 1, 2, 3 muscle fibers that it innervates. So the second motor unit 2, is actually a slightly larger motor unit because it innervates more fibers. And so the way that increasing muscle strength or increasing muscle force production works is that we start with our small motor units first, and then we work our way up to the big motor units. So in terms of muscle fiber types, so broadly speaking, you've got 2 types of muscle fibers. You've got slow twitch muscle fibers and fast twitch muscle fibers. The fast twitch has 2 major subtypes. There's type 2As and then type 2Xs. So the type 2As are the smaller of the 2 fast twitch types, and they're a little bit more aerobic. So they can't generate quite as much force as the 2Xs, but they can generate a little bit less force for a longer period of time. And then the 2Xs are the largest of the fiber types. They can generate a lot of force, but they get tired really quickly. So they produce most of their energy anaerobically, so they are fast fatiguing fibers. And so the way that the size principle works is that, again, we start with our small motor units. So we start with our type 1, our slow twitch fibers. And then if that's not enough to lift whatever weight it is that we're trying to lift, we, in addition to the type 1s, recruit the 2As, so the slightly larger motor units. And then if that's not enough to lift the weight that we need to lift, then we work our way up to the 2Xs. And so eventually, if we need to lift a really heavy weight, or heavy relative to what our strength output is, we'll recruit all of our motor units. So we'll recruit type 1s, type 2As, and type 2Xs all at the same time. So that's the size principle. It says that we start with the smaller motor units first and then work our way up to the larger ones so that we can generate progressively more force. Because if we went the other way, we started with the big ones first, we generate these really big muscle contractions, really big strong muscle contractions initially. And so that's probably too much force, more force than we need to overcome most of the relatively small resistances that we encounter in our daily lives. So, if you're going to pick up a pen or a remote control or your computer, those kinds of things, that doesn't generally require a whole lot of force output. And so you don't want to recruit the big the big motor units first, because effectively you would just kind of like throw whatever that light object was because you generate too much force. So we start small, work our way up to big. So that's the size principle. All or nothing is if we recruit this motor unit, all of its muscle fibers are going to contract. It may just be a twitch where it's a split second. You get quick interaction of actin and myosin and then quick relaxation. But all of them are going to contract at least briefly. They're all going to twitch. Or not at all, right? And so that's the reason that we recruit the small ones first, is because we know we're going to activate all these muscle fibers. So if I don't know how much force I need to generate, or if I'm lifting something fairly light, I only need a couple muscle fibers because I know they're both going to contract. And then if I need to lift something fairly heavy, well, then I'll do both of these, because now I'm going to add up these 2 plus these 3, and so we get 5 total muscle fibers contracting there. So the all or nothing principle says that if an alpha motor neuron is stimulated, all the muscle fibers that it's attached to will contract or twitch. So that's one aspect of how we generate more force or more strength is by motor unit recruitment. We recruit progressively larger motor units. The next way is by rate coding. And so rate coding says that if we need a low intensity muscle contraction, this little alpha motor neuron is only going to send a few signals per second. So that's the frequency of firing, or the frequency of depolarization. So if we need a relatively low intensity contraction, if I'm lifting something small like a pin, this little alpha motor neuron will only fire maybe 20 or 30 times per second. And so when it sends an electrical signal, that is going to cause the release of calcium, without boring you too much about stuff we covered in 201, but that'll cause the release of calcium from the sarcoplasmic reticulum here inside this muscle cell, and it'll allow the interaction of actin and myosin. So as it keeps sending signals, if it sends a signal, break, send a signal, break, send a signal, break, you're going to release some calcium, pump some back in, release some calcium, pump some back in. And so you get some interaction of actin and myosin, but not a continual interaction of actin and myosin. And so with that lower frequency of firing, you get a lower intensity of muscle contraction. So you generate less force. So if we need a higher intensity muscle contraction, though, that alpha motor neuron, our little purple one, rather than depolarizing 20 times per second, may depolarize or send electrical signals 80 times per second. So you get a higher frequency of firing, or higher frequency of action potentials, or depolarizations. They all mean the same thing. So with that higher frequency, you get this sustained release of calcium from the sarcoplasmic reticulum and this sustained interaction of actin and myosin, and then the muscle will be able to, or the muscle cell will be able to generate more tension, more force. So rate coding then is the number of action potentials, or number of depolarizations per second from the alpha motor neuron. More action potentials, or more depolarizations per second, which is also referred to as higher frequency, equals stronger muscle contraction because of that continual release of calcium from the sarcoplasmic reticulum. So these are the primary 2 ways that we increase muscle force. This one comes with adaptations, particularly adaptations to strength training. So motor unit synchronization is if we get synchronous firing, let's say we're going to max out. So I'm going to do max out on deadlift. I'm going to pick up the heaviest amount of weight I can pick up one time. So in doing that, to generate lots of force, I need this alpha motor neuron, or motor unit 1, and then this one, the purple and the red, to fire at the same time so that all 5 of these muscle fibers will contract simultaneously. So synchronous firing means that all the alpha motor neurons depolarize simultaneously, activate all the muscle fibers simultaneously, so they're all engaged at the same time, so we can generate a lot of force, and we can do so really quickly. That also affects muscle power, which is the ability to generate force quickly. And you'll also see the term rate of force development. That's muscle power as well. So we need good synchronous firing to enable us to produce a good amount of force in the muscle. Sorry. So that's one of those adaptations that we get to strength training early on. So one of the things you'll see if you train novice athletes is that they will get stronger pretty quickly. So within the first 4 to 8 weeks, you'll see pretty significant increases in muscle strength, but you won't see very big or very noticeable increases in muscle size. So how do they get stronger if the muscles aren't getting larger? Well, part of the answer is that they get increased synchronization of their motor units. So if they've never done deadlift before, to stick with that example, maybe initially they fire these two guys, or they fire motor unit 1, and then a split second later they fire motor unit 2, right? And so they're not firing at the same time like they need to if you want to lift a lot of weight. And then by doing that activity repeatedly, so after 12, 24 workouts, whatever that number is, they're going to get better. They basically train the nervous system, they train their brain to be able to recruit the motor units that they need to recruit at the same time. And so through that increasing synchronization of that firing, they're going to be able to activate all the muscle cells simultaneously, which allows them to generate more force and allows them to pick up a heavier weight. Asynchronous firing is when this motor unit fires and takes a break, and then this motor unit fires and then takes a break. And so these two will alternate firing. So motor unit 1 fires, then motor unit 2, back to 1, back to 2, back and forth, right? So that's asynchronous firing. And so we see asynchronous firing in endurance sports. So if you've got a cross-country athlete, for example, let's say we've got 4 motor units. So on the first step, they're going to recruit 1 motor unit in the hamstrings. And then on step number 2, they'll recruit motor unit number 2 while the other 3 are resting. Step number 3, they'll recruit motor unit number 3 while the other 3 are resting. Step number 4, on out like that. And so what that does is it allows the other motor units to rest, and then that extends muscular endurance. And that's one of the things we talked about or touched on a little bit previously. I talked about the idea that if you train a volleyball athlete and have them do a bunch of endurance training, so you have your volleyball team do half marathon training, which is very aerobic and very endurance oriented, the reason that could result in a decrease in performance is because you're going to teach these athletes who are power athletes who need to be able to recruit all their motor units at one time. They need to be able to synchronously fire to jump high. You're going to teach them, or teach their nervous system, to fire those motor units asynchronously so that they can get through this 13-mile race. And so you're basically going to confuse the nervous system. It kind of forgets how to recruit all the motor units at one time, and so force output goes down after a prolonged endurance training program. So they're going to learn to fire asynchronously, and then they're going to go back to the volleyball court having just made this adaptation, and they're not going to be able to jump as high because they need to fire all their motor units synchronously. So this is a graphic that you saw before in 201 if you already took that class with me. So here's our type 1 muscle fibers, here's our type 2A, here's our type 2X's. So this is labeled as percent of aerobic capacity, so aka your VO2 max. 100% of your VO2 max is roughly your best mile time, the fastest you could run a mile. So the reason you can go faster than your aerobic capacity is because you're running faster than your mile time. So if you're sprinting, right, you'd be operating above your aerobic capacity. You are running through ATP faster than you can meet that energy demand by supplying oxygen. So, but this corresponds kind of roughly to percent of 1 rep max in strength exercises as well. So if you're doing 50% or less of your 1 repetition max, so if you're doing really high rep stuff, so let's keep that number in mind. So we're going to do 50% or less of our 1 rep max. So I'm going to show you this chart. I'm going to come back to it a couple times. So if we're doing 50% of our 1 rep max here, we're doing sets of somewhere between 30 and 50 repetitions. Okay, so we're doing really high rep stuff. So if we're doing that, we're only using, to go back to this graphic, we only need our type 1 fibers. And then if we lift a little bit heavier, so if we start doing 60% of our 1 rep max, then we're going to have to dip into some of these type 2A fibers. So that's the way that motor unit recruitment works. So if we're lifting more than 50%, we've already used up all our type 1 fibers. Now we have to call for help or get some extra assistance from these type 2As. And then if we lift more than 75% of our 1 rep max, now we need help from the type 2Xs. And so there you see that increasing motor unit recruitment, or that size principle, where we start with the small muscle fibers and work our way up to the big ones. And then the past 100% or near maximal strength, that's when rate coding becomes more important. So through here, you are going to increase the frequency of depolarization of the alpha motor neurons, but when you're operating really close to your 1 rep max, that's when maximizing that rate coding, getting that alpha motor neuron to depolarize somewhere in the neighborhood of 80 times per second becomes really important, and that synchronous firing also becomes important. So why does this matter? It matters because if we're lifting really light weights for high repetitions, we're never going to train these fibers because the fibers will respond to training, right? So with strength training, the muscle fibers are going to get bigger. With that really high repetition training, they're also going to add some capillaries. They're going to add some mitochondria. So the responses or the adaptations in the muscle fiber will be pretty similar to what we see with endurance training. If we do more like 65% of our 1 rep max, I'm going to go back to that chart. So if we're going to do 65% of our 1 rep max, now we're doing sets of 15 to 20 repetitions. So now we're also recruiting some of our type 2A fibers. So then they are going to get larger, they're going to get stronger, they're going to get some more mitochondria. And then, as we progress up to more like 85%, now we're recruiting the type 2Xs. So all the muscle fibers are making those adaptations of getting larger, stronger, more connective tissue around them. And actually, one of the things that happens here, which is kind of counterintuitive, is that with strength training, the type 2Xs actually start to act a little bit more like the type 2As. So their natural inclination, or natural morphology is probably a better term there, is that the 2Xs are very anaerobic fibers. They have few to no mitochondria. They have they are almost entirely anaerobic, right? So with training, though, they shift a little bit. They start to synthesize some mitochondria. They start to synthesize some capillaries, and so they become a little bit more aerobic, and they have a little bit better endurance and become more like the 2A fibers. All right, so other factors that affect the expression of strength, the stretch shortening cycle. So muscles are elastic, and by elastic I mean that they're able to deform, so change shape, and then return back to their original configuration. So muscles are stretchy, kind of like rubber bands. When you stretch them out, they pop back, or they want to pop back to their original length. And so if we take advantage of that elasticity, which is based largely on the connective tissue, so remember that muscles have 3 layers of connective tissue in them. So you have the endomysium, which is a layer of connective tissue around individual muscle cells, the paramysium, which is a layer of connective tissue around groups of muscle cells called a fascicle, and then the epimysium, which is a layer of connective tissue around the whole muscle. All those 3 layers run together and form the tendon. So those layers of connective tissue are collagen, and so that collagen is elastic itself. And so whenever you stretch it, it wants to bounce back to its original position. So the primary reason that muscles are elastic is because of that connective tissue. So if we stretch a muscle really quickly, it wants to return back to its original shape really quickly. And so we see that in a lot of our sporting movements where, thinking of something like a throwing or a serving motion where the arm comes back or the shoulder comes back into abduction and external rotation, you get this quick stretch of the internal rotators, and then you're going to actively contract them. So you're going to move back into, I don't want to throw too much terminology at you, but you're going to get a quick stretch of the internal rotators. They're going to contract, and then so you get this combination of the elasticity of the connective tissue that is bouncing back to its original configuration, plus the voluntary muscle contraction. If you add those two together, you generate more force. So by doing a rapid stretch first, and then you get a rapid contraction, you can generate more force. So that's one thing. And then the other thing there is the stretch reflex. So you have special muscle cells inside of a muscle called muscle spindles. They detect how lengthened a muscle is or not, and then also rate of change. So if a muscle is stretched really quickly, they send a signal back to the spinal cord and then back to the brain that causes a reflex contraction. So the classic example there is if you've ever been to the doctor and they do that patellar tendon reflex test where just below your kneecap they tap on your patellar tendon and then your quads contract, the muscles on the front of your thigh. What's happening there is by him or her tapping on your patellar tendon, that's causing a small but rapid stretch of your quad group, and then so reflexively, because you've stretched those muscles really quickly, it's a protective reflex, the muscles respond by contracting. And so the idea there, or what muscle spindles do in part, is to help keep the muscles from being injured by overstretching. So if the muscle stretched really quick, they respond by initiating a contraction to prevent that overstretch. And so if we're doing something, again, like a serving motion or a throwing motion, by doing a really rapid abduction external rotation, we're getting this rapid stretch of those internal rotators. So not only are we taking advantage of the elastic energy of the connective tissue in those muscles, but we're also getting a stretch reflex. So as we rapidly stretch those internal rotators, the muscle spindles in those muscles sense, hey, we're being stretched too quickly, we need to get a reflex contraction. So you get actually an involuntary contraction in addition to the voluntary contraction that you're intending, trying to throw the ball or hit the ball, whether you're throwing or serving. Neuromuscular inhibition is turning a muscle off. So neuromuscular inhibition is caused by Golgi tendon organs. So they are proprioceptors. So they give your body information about where it is in space. So the muscle spindles are also proprioceptors. So Golgi tendon organs sit in the tendons, but whereas the muscle spindles cause reflex muscle contraction, the Golgi tendon organs cause reflex muscle relaxation. So my go-to example here is if you've ever seen somebody max out like on bench press, where they bring the bar down to their chest, they push it about halfway up, and they just kind of get stuck, and then the bar just drops, like it looks like the muscles give out. That's a Golgi tendon reflex. Basically, if the muscles generate too much tension, the Golgi tendon organs will cause reflex relaxation or reflex inhibition to prevent the muscle from being damaged by generating too much force. So trying to keep the muscles from tearing themselves, basically. And so if muscles aren't accustomed to generating very much force, say you've got somebody who's untrained, then the Golgi tendon organs are going to be pretty active. When they generate just a little bit of force, those are going to cause reflex inhibition, and so they won't be able to lift very much weight. But as they are exposed repeatedly and progressively to higher and higher loads, the individual that's training, their neuromuscular system starts to become used to that stimulus, and so the Golgi tendon organs develop higher and higher thresholds for firing. So that's one of those other neuromuscular adaptations that we see in individuals that allows them to get stronger really rapidly without seeing any increases in muscular size. Is just the brakes, or the governor, if you will, that's keeping you from expressing maximal muscular strength. The brakes take longer to apply, or they're less sensitive, I guess. So other things, muscle fiber type. Your type 1, the slow twitch fibers are, they're small, they can't generate very much force, but they can generate a little bit of force for a long time, so hours and hours on end. So downside to the type 1 or the slow twitch fibers, they're weak, but they're relatively weak for a long time. The fast twitch fibers, they're strong, but they get tired quickly. So good and strong, relatively little endurance. But most of us have, and it depends on the muscle and depends on your genetic makeup, but most of us have a pretty close to 50-50 makeup. So most of our muscles are pretty close to 50-50 slow twitch, fast twitch. But really elite athletes, so really elite sprint athletes, part of their genetic gift is that they just have more type 2 fibers. And so because they've got more type 2 fibers, they can generate more force more quickly, and the type 2 fibers are more responsive to strength training. They have a higher ceiling whenever you train them. So if you lift weights, they have a higher growth capacity. I think they can get 50% larger, whereas the type 1 fiber is only like 25% larger. It's not much. So if you are genetically gifted with a bunch of, or higher proportion of type 2 fibers, you can get larger, you can get stronger, and you can get faster really easily. But you're going to have not the best endurance. On the other hand, if you are an elite endurance athlete, an elite marathoner, an elite cyclist, you probably have a higher proportion of type 1 fibers. So they're not going to be able to generate very much force, but they're going to be able to generate a little bit of force for a really long time. So I think one of the stats I saw relatively recently was like elite endurance cyclists have like 85% type 1 fibers in their quads. So to reach that elite level, you have to have that. This is kind of part of the genetic gift that you have to be able to reach that elite level, is you have to have that right fiber type composition. Now that said, Again, it does vary between muscles. Like, so for example, in the lower leg, your two major plantar flexors, so the muscles that cause you to come up on your tippy toes, in your calf, the most superficial one that makes the W shape, that one is gastrocnemius. That one's mostly type 2 fibers, so we use that when we sprint, or more preferentially when we sprint. And then your one that's deep to that is called the soleus, and the soleus is more type 1 fibers. It's more of a postural muscle. So if you're just like standing around, you're using soleus to keep the ankle in a neutral position so you don't fall down. So those postural muscles then tend to have a higher proportion of type 1 fibers. But all of that said, there is some variance between individuals between type 1, type 2 makeup. And then muscular hypertrophy. So hypertrophy is growth. And so all else being equal, a larger muscle is a stronger muscle, because as you strength train and the muscle grows, one of the primary ways that it grows is by adding new actin, new myosin, or additional actin and myosin. And actin and myosin are the two contractile proteins. So if you have more actin, more myosin in a muscle cell, it can form more cross bridges and it can generate more tension. So a larger muscle is a stronger muscle because it has more of the contractile proteins in it. So in terms of adaptations to strength training, the first is neurological. So I mentioned this one before. So again, you'll see individuals who undertake a strength training program make adaptations really quickly before you see an increase in muscular size. And the reason for that is because of these neurological adaptations. So they get better at recruiting the relevant motor units. So they get better at recruiting the type 1s and 2As at the same, and recruiting them at the same time. They also get better at relaxing the muscles that shouldn't be involved. So if they're doing something like a bicep curl, for example, triceps will be, or part of triceps will be active in stabilizing the shoulder. But for the most part, you actually want triceps pretty relaxed. And so they'll get better at relaxing triceps while they're contracting biceps, brachialis, brachioradialis. So we get better at motor unit recruitment, better at synchronization. We can rate code more quickly. So rather than like kind of slowly working your way up from 20 pulses per second or 20 action potentials per second to 30 to 50 to whatever, they get better at doing it pretty instantaneously. And so that helps them express their strength more effectively, i.e. lift more weight. And then reflex activation. So again, that Golgi tendon reflex that causes the muscle to shut down, those Golgi tendon organs end up developing higher and higher thresholds before they fire. So you can lift more and more weight before they cause reflex inhibition or reflex relaxation. Morphological are changes to the muscle itself. So you'll get muscular hypertrophy, as mentioned. So you get inside of the muscle cell, you get more actin, more myosin. The muscle cell gets larger, can generate more force, more tension. The fiber types can move around some. So there's a lot of discussion, debate, I guess, about the true number of fiber types. It's kind of generally easiest to conceptualize them as just those three that I laid out. But you'll see some books talk about like 7 or even more. But for our purposes and for the CSCS exam, it's still just the 3 fiber types to concern yourself with. But they do move around a little bit. So again, the type 2Xs can act more like the type 2As in response to strength training. In response to endurance training, the type 2As can act more like type 1s, so they can actually lose some size. They can add more mitochondria, more capillaries, more citric acid cycle enzymes, those kinds of things. So there is some malleability in the fiber types. They can act like other fibers in response to specific training. And then fiber architecture, it's just the way the muscle is laid out. So these are the basic architectural alignment. So you got your strap muscle. Unipinnate is you've got a tendon here and then muscle fibers just off to one side. Bipinnate, muscle fibers off to either side. And then multipinnate, like you see in the deltoid muscle, where they're going off. You have multiple tendons that merge into one, and then fibers coming off of each of those tendons. The way the architecture changes is as this muscle cell increases in size, that is going to increase its angle of insertion here. And so when we increase its angle of insertion, that's going to pull on the tendon a little bit. And so that's one of the things so as we pull on that tendon, it's going to pull on its insertion across whichever joint it crosses. And so that's going to be one of the things that helps stabilize the joint, actually, So in response to strength training, you get an increase in joint stability. And part of it is because as the muscle cells grow and as the muscle overall grows, it sort of changes the alignment of the muscle fibers with the tendon and then helps increase tension, even resting tension in the muscle, and then that increases joint stability. All right, so the different types of strength, I won't belabor this too much because this is one of those textbook things. General strength is kind of like we talked about with the general preparatory phase, where they do things that are not specific to their sport, so things like squat, bench press, deadlift, lat pulls, pull-ups, that kind of stuff. So that's your general strength. Your specific strength is their strength to perform specific tasks in their sport. So hopefully by increasing their general strength, we can increase their specific strength as well. So for example, if we take an athlete, basketball player, we have them do a bunch of presses. So you have them do like dumbbell bench press, maybe some overhead presses, that kind of stuff. You're going to strengthen their ability to extend their elbow. And then hopefully by strengthening their elbow extension, you can increase the strength of their shot. Maybe they can shoot from a little bit farther out because that's an important part of the shooting motion, is being able to extend that elbow. And so hopefully you can then increase their specific strength, what they need to play basketball, or in this case to shoot the basketball, by working on their general strength. So general strength kind of lays that foundation for sport-specific strength, which is the strength they need to do, or they need to perform the technical aspects of the sport. Muscular power is what the volleyball player is doing there. So muscular power is generating force quickly. So those are our explosive motions. So things like vertical jump is usually the way lower body power is assessed. Upper body power can be assessed through things like bench press throws that I'll show you here in a second, or different like medicine ball throws, those kinds of things. But the easiest way to conceptualize it is muscular power is the ability to generate force quickly. Muscular strength is being able to generate lots of force, or maximal strength is the ability to generate lots of force. So in terms of maximal strength, think of it as the most weight you can lift one time. So how much can you deadlift, how much can you squat, how much can you bench press, those kinds of things. Those are tests of muscular strength. Muscular endurance is how many repetitions can you do. So if you have somebody, you say, okay, going back to the physical fitness test example, you got 2 minutes, how many push-ups can you do? That's a test of muscular endurance. How many repetitions in a certain amount of time, or just reps to failure is also muscular endurance, even without the time limit. Absolute strength is just how much can they lift. So if somebody can deadlift 500 pounds, then that's their absolute strength. Relative strength is how much can they lift relative to their body weight. So maybe if somebody, if you've got a guy that weighs 300 pounds and he can deadlift 500, well, that's not quite twice body weight, right? So that's like absolutely 500 pounds is a lot of weight, but relative to that person's body size, that's really not that great. As opposed to if you take somebody who is, in the who weighs like 175 pounds and they can deadlift 500. That's multiple times body weight, right? And so that is more impressive. They have a higher relative strength. All right. So variables for training. This is a handy little chart, I guess. It's kind of funny looking, but it is a pretty handy little thing here. So what you've got here on the left, these are their percentages of 1 rep max. 1 rep max is the most amount of weight you can lift one time. And then, so if we're working at 20 to 50% of their 1 rep max, that is low intensity. 50 to 70%, medium intensity, 70 to 80, medium heavy, 80 to 90, heavy, and then max is 90 to 100. Over here, super maximal is when they're lifting more weight than they can lift. How could they possibly do that? Negatives, or partial reps is kind of another way to do that, but negatives is the more accurate way of doing that. So let's say somebody, bench presses 200 pounds. You could have them do negatives where you throw 205, 210 on the bar, and then the spotter helps them take the bar out of the rack, and then they just lower the bar to their chest as slowly as they can. That's a negative rep. And so in that way, they're handling weight that's actually above their 1 repetition maximum. So that's what's going on over here. And you can tell what you're working on in each of these areas. So if you're doing that low intensity stuff, it's more muscular endurance. Arguably, this is muscle power. It's kind of a weird range, I think. But so sometimes for muscular power, you'll see, and kind of my go-to numbers are, if you want to work on muscular power, you can either work really high really heavy weights, so high intensity stuff, kind of over in here, or you can work really light weights and move them fast. So my go-to numbers are between 20 and 40% of their 1 rep max, sets of 3 or less, and move the weight as fast as possible. So that's one way to work muscular power. And then the other way is to lift really heavy weights, so 80% or higher, and try to move the weight as fast as possible. And so really it's more like 90%. And so obviously the weight's not actually going to move very fast, but the intent to move fast is pretty important from a neuromuscular training standpoint. So those are kind of the two ways to work on power. Those are all the big things from that chart. And then this table I think is also pretty useful. So this is percentage of 1 rep max. So if you're lifting 100%, obviously you can only lift it one time. But if you drop it down to 95%, you should be able to get it twice. 90%, 3 times. 85%, 5 times. 80%, 6 times, on down. So I think this is a pretty helpful little chart, and I'll actually refer back to it several times. So in terms of manipulation of training variables, so obviously we can manipulate volume. So you can, if you want to increase volume, you increase the number of sets or repetitions. So typically we increase the number of sets. So you say go from 3 sets of 10 to 4 sets of 10. That's an increase in volume there. Or you could go from 3 sets of 10 to 3 sets of 12. But in doing that, you're shifting more to muscular endurance and away from strength, which is not usually the way that training goes. In terms of intensity, as you can see, that's the weight lifted or the resistance used. So in saying resistance used, I'm thinking about if you're using like bands or medicine balls or those kinds of things. I guess bands is the better example there. If you go from a yellow band to a red band, that increases the resistance. So that's another variable that we can manipulate. We can add more weight. We can do a darker band, and so then that is a higher intensity. Something else that we can manipulate is the buffer. So the buffer is the difference between the number of reps that they do and the number of reps that they could have done. So for example, here, if we have somebody who does 5 reps at 80% of their 1 rep max. Well, if we look back at this chart, so 80% of your 1 rep max, you should be able to do 6 reps, but they only did 5. So that should have been 85% of their 1 rep max, but it wasn't. And so that gives us a buffer of 5% because they only lifted 80% 5 times when they could have lifted 85% 5 times, and so then that gives us a 5% buffer. And so what you can see here is they're doing the same number of reps, but lower intensity. So they've got bigger buffers. So they're moving from 10% buffer to 7.5% to 5%. So they're not doing true repetition maxes. They're only doing 5 reps, but they're not doing 85%. And so you can decrease the buffer, and so that's another way to increase the intensity. It's kind of a way to think about it. And they're doing the same thing over here. Another thing that we can do is increase the velocity of movement. So rather than just lifting heavy weights, we can increase how fast we move the weights. And so, again, one of my classic examples here for the upper body is bench press throws. You have to do this one on a Smith machine. But what you do, you twist it so that the hooks won't catch, and then you just throw the weight as high as you can. And you whenever you're doing these power movements, it's 3 repetitions or less. Oftentimes it's 1 or 2. And so the idea there is to just move as fast as possible. We want really long rest periods. So we're looking for high quality here, not high volume. So moving the weight as fast as possible, you'll have, potentially a 2 to 5 minute rest between, and then we're going to go for some more high quality stuff after that. So that's classic upper body power exercise. And then you got this guy, it's a video, but he was doing jump squats. And so you don't actually have to leave the ground if you have this set up with the rubber bands or the resistance bands. You can just, from the bottom of the squat, try to move the bar as fast as you can coming up. And so obviously the bands are going to slow you down, so you don't have to worry about like losing control of it when you get to the top. And you can also leave the ground. You also see jump squats done with things like hex bars or trap bars, whatever you want to call them. Those are a good way to do that. You can also do them with dumbbells as well. Other things we can manipulate, how long they rest between sets. So if we're doing hypertrophy, like bodybuilding type training, the rest periods are pretty short. Typically, 60 seconds is kind of the average. You can drop it down to more like 45 or 30. Sometimes as long as 90 seconds, but typically bodybuilding, kind of like I said, kind of the average is about 60 seconds. And we can do that same kind of thing if we're looking for endurance. So we can do, set of 15, really short rest period, set of 15, really short rest period. So, with our athletes, our cross-country runners and our swimmers. For strength and power stuff, so if you're lifting more weight or you're lifting weight faster, again, you're going to want longer rest periods, so 2 to 5 minutes for that higher quality of repetition. In terms of the order of exercises, we've talked about some of this stuff. So you want to start with your fast movements, so your power exercises, your jumps and stuff come first, or any unbalanced things like this, which is impressive, because she's on the blue side. Like the blue side's down, that's pretty impressive. And so you would do your unbalanced stuff first, and the rationale there is because it's unbalanced, because it's something like this where you're in kind of a precarious position, you don't want to pre-fatigue them because you can make it more likely they get hurt. Now there are certain training stimuli where we actually do want to challenge that. We want them to be able to be aware of where they are in space and be able to control their body when they're fatigued. So at times you do move these unbalanced kind of exercises to the bottom, but in general, we're going to start with these first because we want to avoid injuries. So explosive or unbalanced stuff first, then heavy stuff, and we generally start with multi-joint, so things like squats, power cleans, snatches, those kinds of things. We start with those first, and then we move to single joint stuff. So if you were going to do a more bodybuilding-esque program, and let's say you're going to do squats or leg presses, you do those first, generally, and then we do single joint stuff after that. So we do like squats and then knee extensions. Again, not a universal. There are times where you want to do something called pre-fatiguing, and so maybe you do leg extensions first and then you do leg press or something like that. But in general, multi-joint first, then single joint. As we discussed in some of the previous chapters, greater frequency, the more often they can lift, the better the gains are. And so in terms of muscular hypertrophy and strength, really. So with respect to frequency, if you can break the training up into smaller sessions, that is better. You tend to have a higher quality of repetitions for the same reasons that we talked about, like breaking up the endurance training and the tactical training, or the endurance training and the technical training, so they can focus on one or the other. That tends to produce a higher quality of work. So, for example, like with bodybuilders, you'll see they'll do a bunch of maybe different presses in the morning, bench press kind of stuff, and then maybe they do a separate like shoulder session in the afternoon, or a separate tricep session in the afternoon, something like that. So even though they're working the same muscle groups, they've broken it up into smaller, more focused sessions, and that seems to be more effective at increasing muscle size. In terms of loading patterns, so most people do what's called a flat pyramid, and so basically what you do is, obviously they're increasing the weight here. The repetitions, so these are their warm-ups, so they're doing a set of 5, 5, 3, 3, and for their work sets, they're going to do 170 kilos for 2 repetitions, and then they're just going to keep that for these 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 work sets. So same intensity, same repetitions, so same intensity, same volume for 6 sets. Nothing changes there, so that's a flat pyramid because you work your way up through the warm-up, and then the top of the pyramid is actually just flat. As opposed to an ascending one, so they'll do their warm-up, working their way up to 160, 165, 175, 185. So increasing the intensity, dropping the volume. Increasing the intensity, dropping the volume, because they're dropping the number of repetitions. And then double pyramids, kind of that flat, or that classic bodybuilder pyramid from the 60s and 70s. But a lot of people still do it. So increasing the weight up to 180 and then coming back down, right? And so usually too, you'll see the repetitions change. So maybe here we're going to do 3, 2, 1, and then back to 2, 3 if they can, rather than just keeping the number of repetitions the same the whole time. A wave is what it sounds like. So when we start the work sets, they go 160, 165, 170, back down. So that's the down part of the wave, and then work their way back up. So it kind of is kind of like that step model that we talked about in terms of microcycles, but it is just within one workout. So they're working their way up, back down, working their way back up. And then cluster sets. So for this guy, or this lifter, this is an Olympic lifter, they're going to do 10 sets of 1, take a break, and then they're going to do another 10 singles. So that's a cluster. So in terms of implementing a strength program, actually setting that thing up, this is stuff that crosses over a lot with what we've already talked about. So you map out the training calendar for the year, determine your training goals, determine the athlete needs. Do they need to add weight? Do they need to work on their rotator cuff strength? What are their shortcomings? What are the weak links? Figure out how the strength training fits in with their other stuff. So with their endurance training, their agility training, their sport training, all that stuff. Select our exercises that are hopefully progressively similar to the movements that they are going to do in their sport. Figure out how we're going to assess whether or not our training program worked. And then, figure out what valid assessments are first, and then build the whole program. And then training log. So obviously we're going to keep track of, here were the goal weights and reps. Did they hit them? But also you can have an athlete do an actual training log where they're writing down like how they felt each set. And then again, you can have them include things about, life stressors, what's going on in class, how they sleep, that kind of stuff. That's helpful to know sometimes as well. So in terms of periodization of strength training, and this we've definitely talked about before. So that first phase, as we've talked before, with the traditional kind of step loading, the way that works is you do more high volume stuff first, and by doing high volume, the muscle cell grows in size, but it's that sarcoplasmic hypertrophy. So that increases the volume of the cell, but most of that volume increase comes from additional fluid. And then as we lift heavier, so as we move from sets of things like 12 with 70% of a 1 rep max down to sets of 5, now that higher intensity is what is a greater stimulus for adding the actin and myosin. And we're recruiting recruiting a lot of the 2X fibers as well. So again, the general thing is we make the muscle larger, and then we make it stronger, and then we make it more powerful. So we do the anatomical adaptation, low intensity, high volume stuff. So again, sets of like 8 to 12 or more. Then we do our maximum strength. They have a larger range of maximum strength than I think is correct. So I would say maximum strength is 80% or higher of 1 rep max, not 70%. And I would say sets of 6 or less, not 12, but whatever. We'll use what they got. And then once we get stronger, then we have to convert that strength to what they need for their sport. So we have to work on their rate of force development, which is what I talked about before. So moving either a lightweight, so 20 to 40% of their 1 rep max as fast as possible, or move a heavyweight with the intention of moving fast. And then during the season, we move to the maintenance phase, so lift 1 to 3 times a week. Again, high intensity is the important part here, not high volume. Because I saw several people in their training programs, during the season, they switched from, in the pre-competitive phase, they'd done sets of 3, so pretty heavy weight. And then during the season, they backed it down to like sets of 12 and 15. Well, by lowering the intensity of that workout, you're actually going to see a decrease in muscle strength and muscle power. So we don't want to do that. We just want to drop the volume. So they may not lift 3 times a week or 4 times a week during the season. Instead, they only lift once, but they're either going to lift heavy or they're going to move it fast. And then at the end, into the transition phase, or this is actually where they're using cessation here is in the lead up to the actual competition. So we can stop strength training 3 to 14 days prior. It depends on what the competition is. If it's a strength power competition, so like shot put or football, you want to lift pretty close. So you don't want to stop more than like 3 days before. If it's something like an Ironman, this real endurance type thing, you can stop strength training a little bit farther out. And then transition phase, compensation exercises, again, are those kind of prehab exercises. You're working to either prevent injuries or you're working to correct muscular imbalances that your sport tends to foster. So for example, like, soccer is pretty quad dominant. So in the off season, have them do a bunch of hamstring stuff to offset that ratio, that quad hamstring ratio. And typically, they're not going to take off more than 4 weeks for serious athletes. So they're not going to be out of the weight room for more than a month in general if they're a pretty high-level athlete. And that is it. So next time we move on to Chapter 11, which is endurance training. So we will see you then.